Welcome to Midnight Horror YouTube channel. As the last light of day dimmed, I barely made it home. One moment, I was singing along to the radio, and the next, I was staring slack-jawed at the most menacing storm clouds I'd ever seen. Born and raised in Montana, I wasn't a stranger to snow squalls, but something about those dark clouds rolling over the mountains filled me with a deep sense of foreboding. Once inside, I shook off the cold and found my partner Ethan staring out the living room window, surveying the ominous sky. "Looks like we'll be spending the evening inside," he commented. As I set my bag down, we heard the doggy door open. We didn't own any pets, but often entertained visits from a neighborhood cat named Whiskers. Sure enough, the old black cat appeared, leaving muddy paw prints as he trotted over to Ethan. "Too cold out there for you?" Ethan asked, petting Whiskers, who purred contentedly. "I'll fix you some dinner," he said, heading to the kitchen. Half an hour later, as we finally sat down to eat, the doggy door opened again. This time, a frantic border collie burst into the dining room, barking and whining. Recognizing it as Mr. Thompson's dog, Buddy, I crouched down to check for injuries, but Buddy snapped his teeth at me, a clear warning to stay back. Ethan grabbed his phone to call Mr. Thompson, but found there was no signal. We tried everything, restarting our phones, walking around the house, toggling airplane mode, but nothing worked. Just as we were about to give up, a light but urgent tapping sound filled the room. It came from the bathroom window, where a small fuzzy animal was desperately scratching at the glass. "What in the world?" I muttered, approaching the window. The animal had torn through the screen to get inside. Ethan identified it as a marten, and despite my protests, he convinced me to let it in. The moment I opened the window, a flurry of about 20 mice surged into the bathroom, followed by a red bird that squeezed through the opening before I could shut it. As I chased after the intruders, I realized our home was becoming a refuge for a variety of animals, all seeking shelter from the storm. More cats and dogs appeared, their behavior strangely subdued. The animals ignored each other, huddling in corners and hiding spots, trembling with fear. "What's going on?" Ethan asked, but I had no answers. The storm outside was fierce, but it didn't seem to explain the animals' terror. I pressed my hand against the living room window, noticing it wasn't as cold as it should have been. "Ethan, is it just me or is the glass warm?" I asked. He confirmed it, and we both stood in uneasy silence. Suddenly, a large black mass ambled towards the house. It was a black bear, horribly mutilated, its lower jaw and one hind leg missing. The bear collapsed just outside the window, its eyes pleading as it bled out and died. "What could have done that to a bear?" Ethan whispered. I hoped that was what the animals were fleeing, but deep down I knew it wasn't the full story. We moved to the center of the house as the lights flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness. We sat on the floor with flashlights, the animals around us growing more agitated. Suddenly, everything went silent. Then a voice called out from outside. "Hello? Anyone in there?" The voice was unnervingly calm. "I need some help out here." I gripped Ethan's arm, refusing to let him move. The voice circled the house, its tone devoid of emotion. "Come on now, don't you have room for one more?" It was right outside the dining room window. I closed my eyes, unwilling to see what was there. Ethan's breath hitched, and I held on to him tightly. After a while, the voice faded away, leaving only the howling wind. When I finally opened my eyes, Ethan was unresponsive, his face twisted in terror. The doctors said he had a stroke, but I knew it was something else. Something he saw that night had broken him. 5 years have passed, and I care for Ethan every day, his condition unchanged. Whiskers still visits, bringing a small measure of comfort. But I can't forget that night, the look on Ethan's face and the chilling voice outside. I wonder if I had opened my eyes, would I have met the same fate? "What did you see?" I ask him, as I have 1,000 times before. But he never answers. It's been 5 years since that storm, and though Ethan's condition remains the same, my unease has only grown. I can't shake the feeling that whatever haunted us that night is still out there, waiting. Whiskers still comes around, and for some reason, his presence always seems to calm Ethan. The other animals never returned after that night, leaving Whiskers as our only reminder of what happened. I spent my days caring for Ethan, and my nights searching for answers. I scoured local legends, consulted with wildlife experts, and even reached out to paranormal investigators, but no one could explain what had happened. Everyone I spoke to dismissed my story as a product of stress or an overactive imagination, but I knew better. Something was out there, something that had terrified those animals and left Ethan in a state of perpetual fear. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, I noticed Whiskers sitting by the living room window, staring intently into the darkness. I followed his gaze but saw nothing. Still, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. There was a heavy, oppressive feeling in the air, much like the night of the storm. I moved to close the curtains when I heard a faint, almost imperceptible sound. It was the same voice from that night. "Hello? Anyone in there?" I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. It couldn't be. I had convinced myself that whatever happened that night was a one-time event, but here it was again, the same eerie, emotionless voice. "Please, I need help," it continued, closer this time. "Can I just come in for a minute? It's so cold out here." I backed away from the window, my hands trembling. I couldn't let it in, I wouldn't. But as I turned to flee, I noticed Ethan. For the first time in 5 years, he was moving. His hand reached out, pointing toward the window, his eyes wide with terror. "No," I whispered, rushing to his side. "No, don't look at it, don't listen." But it was too late. Ethan's body convulsed, and he let out a guttural scream, a sound so raw and primal that it sent shivers down my spine. He collapsed, his body limp and unresponsive. "Please, let me in," the voice persisted, now accompanied by a soft tapping on the window. I turned to face it, feeling a mix of dread and determination. I had to protect Ethan. I had to end this. Grabbing a flashlight, I made my way to the front door, my steps heavy with fear. I opened it just a crack, shining the beam of light into the night. There, standing just beyond the threshold, was a figure cloaked in shadows. Its eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the light. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "What do you want?" The figure stepped closer, its features becoming more distinct. It looked human, but there was something profoundly wrong about it. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its eyes were empty voids. "I just need to come in," it said, its voice devoid of any emotion. "It's so cold out here." "Stay back," I shouted, slamming the door shut. I locked it, barricading it with furniture, and ran back to Ethan's side. He was still unresponsive, his body cold and rigid. The tapping continued, now more insistent. I knew I couldn't ignore it forever. I had to find a way to end this once and for all. Desperation led me to the attic, where I rummaged through old boxes and trunks, searching for anything that could help. Among the dusty relics of the past, I found an old journal belonging to my great-grandmother. Inside, I discovered stories of similar encounters, warnings about letting the cold ones inside. The journal detailed rituals and protective measures, instructions passed down through generations. I followed them meticulously, creating a protective circle around the house and reciting the incantations written in the journal. The tapping grew louder, more frantic, but I continued, pouring all my fear and determination into the words. As I finished the last incantation, the tapping ceased. The oppressive feeling lifted, and the air seemed to lighten. I cautiously approached the window and peered outside. The figure was gone, and the night was still. Returning to Ethan's side, I noticed a change. His breathing was steady, and though he remained unresponsive, there was a calmness to him that hadn't been there before. I stayed by his side all night, watching over him, whispering reassurances. In the morning, Whiskers climbed into Ethan's lap, purring softly. I took it as a sign that, for now, we were safe. But I knew this wasn't the end. The cold ones were out there, and they would come back. I vowed to be ready, to protect Ethan and our home from whatever darkness sought to breach our sanctuary. Years passed, and life continued. Ethan never fully recovered, but he was more at peace. and Whiskers remained our loyal guardian. I continued to study the journal, preparing for the day the cold ones would return, and when they did, I would be ready, armed with the knowledge of my ancestors and the unwavering determination to protect those I loved.